My daughter-in-law kissed my blind mother on the forehead, picked up her garment bag, and walked out the front door for her sister's wedding in Atlanta. The moment her taillights disappeared past the magnolia trees, my mother turned her head toward me. Not the way a blind woman turns toward sound. The way someone who can see turns toward the person they need to speak to. "Sit down, Henry," she said. "I can see. I've been able to see for 4 years, and I've seen everything she's done to you. Thank you for staying with me. Before we go further, let me know where you're watching from, your city, your country, anywhere in the world. I would love to see how far this story reaches. Also, please note some parts of this story are fictionalized for narrative purposes. Any similarities are purely coincidental, but the message is something to reflect on." The tea was good that morning. I do not know why I remember that so clearly, but I do. It was the first thing I noticed, standing alone in the kitchen of our Victorian house on Sunset Mountain, watching the early October light push through the tall windows and fall in long amber ribbons across the piano in the next room. The tea Vivian had prepared before she came downstairs was smooth. No bitterness at the back of the throat, no faint heaviness that I had never quite been able to name. Just tea the way it was supposed to taste. I stood there with the cup in both hands and thought. Strange. For the better part of 7 years, I had been waking up to something that never sat quite right. Not the house. The house was beautiful. A 3-story Victorian on the western slope of Sunset Mountain in Asheville, North Carolina, with stone walls darkened by a century of weather and windows tall enough that the Blue Ridge Mountains filled every frame. I had spent 35 years as a professor of music composition, and when I finally stepped back in 2017, this house was what all of it had been for. The house. The Steinway grand piano that had sat in the music room since I was 10 years old, and the view of the Swannanoa Valley that I had once believed would be the backdrop to whatever music I still had left to write. But somewhere along the way, the mornings had started to feel heavier than they should. My thinking had grown slower, like a melody losing its structure. The notes still present, but arriving in the wrong order at the wrong tempo. I had blamed age. I had blamed the grief of watching my mother lose her sight 9 years ago. I had blamed the kind of exhaustion that settles into a man who once composed symphonies and now could not hold a musical phrase in his mind long enough to write it down. What I had not considered was that the fog might not be coming from inside me at all. I heard Vivian before I saw her. The sound of heels on hardwood, precise and unhurried, came down the main staircase at 7:45 that morning. My daughter-in-law was 39 years old with dark hair pulled into a low knot and the kind of posture that suggested she had never once let her guard down in a room she did not control. She had come into our lives 6 years ago as a music student who caught Daniel's eye at a charity concert. Then his girlfriend, then within 18 months his wife. She was capable, organized, always composed. She set her garment bag near the front door and came into the kitchen. "Your 9 o'clock is the small white pill," she said. Opening the medication organizer she kept beside the refrigerator, she placed today's compartment on the counter with 2 fingers, the way you would set a document down for someone to sign, and do not skip the afternoon one. "I know," I said. She smiled. The corners of her mouth moved correctly. Her teeth showed. Her head tilted just slightly to the right. Everything a smile was supposed to do. But her eyes stayed exactly where they were, flat and focused, as though the expression had been applied from the outside rather than built from within. "I will be back from Atlanta on Monday. Jenna's wedding is Saturday, reception Sunday." I gave the hotel number to the house phone. She picked up her handbag. "There is food in the freezer. Mrs. Holden from the agency will come Tuesday and Thursday. Mother Calloway's eye drops are in the cabinet, same shelf." She did not kiss my cheek. She did not pause at the doorway. She walked to the front door, collected her garment bag, and stepped out. The door closed behind her with a soft, final click. The sound of something being sealed rather than simply shut. I watched her load the bag into the gray sedan. She checked her phone once, got in, and reversed down the driveway past the magnolias whose leaves were just beginning to turn the deep bronze of early autumn in the southern Appalachians. The house was quiet. I drank my tea. I thought about the medication organizer and the way she had set the pills in front of me without asking if I wanted them. I thought about Dr. Franklin, my physician for 22 years, who had retired in 2018 and been replaced by Vivian's chosen recommendation, a Dr. Raymond Sutter on the other side of town. In 6 years, I had never once spoken to Dr. Sutter alone. Vivian drove me, sat in the waiting room, and was always present when the doctor entered. Family support, she called it. I had thought that was considerate. Standing in my kitchen with tea that tasted clean and right for the first time in longer than I could remember, I found myself thinking about it differently, but the thought was slippery, like trying to catch a melody that disappears the moment you reach for a pen. Every time I brought it forward, something pushed back. A tired voice that said, "Henry, you are getting old. You are suspicious. You are not well. That is why she helps." I set down the cup. That is why she helps. I had told myself that 1,000 times. And this morning, the sentence did not land the way it usually did. It hung in the air like a wrong note in a familiar chord, present but not resolved, waiting for something to follow it. Then I heard it. From the music room, 20 feet through the open archway. The Steinway. A single note at first. Then a sequence. Slow and deliberate. Building into a melody I had not heard, played on that piano in over 40 years. A lullaby. The one my mother used to play for me when I was a boy, when the house was quiet and the mountains were dark, and the world had not yet become the complicated thing it would eventually become. My mother had not played that lullaby since before she lost her sight. The melody continued for perhaps 30 seconds, each note placed with intention that went beyond muscle memory. Then it stopped. The silence was not empty. It was full the way a rest in music is full, holding everything that came before it, and everything about to come. And then her voice, clear and steady and carrying an authority I had not heard in nearly a decade. "Henry, come sit with me." I walked through the archway into the music room, the way a man walks towards something he does not yet understand but already feels the weight of. The October light was coming in through the east-facing windows at its mid-morning angle, falling across the old hardwood floor in broad, warm panels that caught the dust in the air and made it visible. The room smelled the way it always smelled, of aged wood and lemon oil, and the particular mineral scent that rises from piano strings when the air is cool enough to carry it. My mother was sitting at the Steinway. That alone was not unusual. She sat there most mornings, had done so for years, her fingers resting on the keys or hovering just above them, sometimes pressing a note or a chord, sometimes simply sitting in the presence of the instrument the way a person sits beside a river without needing to fish. The family understood it as comfort. A blind woman finding her way back to something familiar through touch and sound. But this morning she was not sitting the way a blind woman sits. Her spine was straight, her chin was lifted, and her eyes, the eyes I had watched lose their focus 9 years ago, the eyes I had grieved for, in the quiet, persistent way you grieve for something lost that you see every single day, were open and clear and looking directly at me, not toward me, at me. With the particular, focused attention of someone who has been waiting for a specific moment and recognizes it the instant it arrives. I stopped in the doorway. My hands were still warm from the tea. The lullaby she had just played hung in the silence of the room like smoke after a candle has been blown out, present but dissolving. And in its place was something else entirely, something that had no melody. "Sit down, Henry," she said. I did not sit down. I stood in the doorway and looked at my mother, at Margaret Rose Calloway, 93 years old, and I tried to reconcile what I was seeing with the 9 years of certainty that preceded it. 9 years of guiding her hand to the banister. 9 years of describing the color of the leaves in October because she could no longer see them. 9 years of watching Vivian administer her eye drops every morning with the quiet, efficient tenderness of a woman caring for someone who could not care for herself. I can see, Henry. Her voice was not loud. It did not need to be. It carried the way certain notes carry in a well-built room, not through volume, but through the precision of their placement. I have been able to see for 4 years, and I chose not to tell anyone. The sentence landed in my chest before my mind had time to process it. Not disbelief exactly. Something closer to the feeling you get when a piece of music you have known your entire life is suddenly played in a different key. The same notes, the same structure. But everything shifted just enough that the familiar becomes unrecognizable. That is not possible, I said. But even as the words left my mouth, I heard how thin they sounded. I was looking at her eyes. They were tracking me, following the small movements of my hands, the shift of my weight from one foot to the other, responding to visual information in the seamless, automatic way that only functional sight allows. "Sit down," she said again, quieter this time. "What I need to tell you will take longer than your legs want to stand for." I crossed the room and sat in the leather chair beside the window, the one I had read in for 30 years, the one that faced the piano at an angle that let me watch whoever was playing without being directly in their line of sight. I had sat in this chair through thousands of hours of music, my own and others. I had never sat in it for a conversation like the one that was about to begin. My mother turned on the bench to face me. The movement was smooth, controlled. The rotation of a woman who has been quietly maintaining her physical capability for years, while everyone around her assumed she could barely navigate the hallway. In the light from the window, her features were sharp and present in a way I had not seen in nearly a decade, the particular clarity of a face that is fully engaged with what it is seeing. People say everything in front of a blind woman. Henry. She folded her hands in her lap. Everything. Because they believe she cannot see. They speak freely. They move freely. They do not guard their faces or their gestures or the things they carry in their hands when they pass through a room. A blind woman is furniture. A blind woman is wallpaper. She paused. A blind woman sitting at a piano is the most invisible person in any house. I said nothing. I was still trying to locate the edges of what was happening. The way you try to locate the edges of a room when you first wake up in an unfamiliar place. I did not choose this lightly, she continued. When my sight began to return, very slowly, at the end of 2019, I did not understand what it meant. Shadows first, then shapes, then color, faint and unreliable. Like listening to a radio signal that comes and goes. By the summer of 2020, I could see clearly enough to read the label on a medicine bottle from across a kitchen counter. She stopped. The silence held for a moment. The kind of silence that exists between the end of one movement in a symphony and the beginning of the next. When the musicians are still and the audience does not yet know whether to breathe. "And the first clear thing I saw," she said, her voice dropping to a register I had never heard from her before. Not a whisper, but something adjacent to it. Something held deliberately below its natural volume, was your daughter-in-law standing at the kitchen counter at 8:15 on a Tuesday evening, opening a small glass vial and adding 3 drops of something that was not tea into the pot she was preparing for you. The room did not change. The light from the window did not shift. The mountains outside the glass held their position exactly as they had held it every morning of my life in this house. But something underneath all of it, something structural, something I had been standing on without knowing it, moved. Not dramatically. Not with the violence of a floor giving way. With the slow, nauseating precision of a foundation being revealed as something other than what you had trusted it to be. "The tea she makes you every evening," my mother said. "I have watched her prepare it. I know what she puts in it." She held my gaze without blinking, and in her eyes I saw something I would need a long time to fully understand. Not anger. Not fear. The settled, patient resolve of a woman who has carried a terrible knowledge for 4 years in complete silence, waiting for exactly this morning. And that is not the worst thing I need to tell you. My mother lifted the lid of the Steinway with both hands, the way she had done 10,000 times across the decades of her life in this house, but this time she reached not for the strings or the tuning pegs but for something else entirely. From inside the body of the piano, From a space between the iron plate and the wooden rim that I had never thought to examine, she withdrew a small notebook. It was bound in the textured cover of a Braille music journal, the kind I had seen her carry for years. The kind the family had always assumed she used to feel her way through compositions she could no longer see. She placed it on the music rest above the keys and opened it. I leaned forward in the chair. The pages were covered in dense, compact writing. Not Braille. Not musical notation. Handwritten text, small and precise, organized in columns with dates running down the left margin and entries beside them in a shorthand that used musical symbols as markers, treble clefs for names, bass clefs for locations, whole notes for amounts. My mother had built an evidence ledger disguised as a blind woman's music journal, and it had been sitting inside the piano in plain sight for years. The compound she adds to your tea is a benzodiazepine derivative, she said, her finger resting beside an entry dated March 2019. Low concentration. Consistent dosage. Administered nightly over a period of years, it produces exactly what you have been experiencing. Cognitive slowing. Memory gaps. Difficulty holding. Sustained thought. The feeling that you are losing yourself in small increments, and that the loss is simply what happens when a man reaches 70. I listened to her describe the systematic erosion of my own mind and felt something I did not have a name for. Not anger, not yet. Something colder. The particular stillness of a man who is being told that the ground he has been standing on is not ground at all. She started in early 2018, my mother continued. Within 3 months of Dr. Franklin retiring and Dr. Sutter taking over your care. The timing was not coincidental. Sutter does not question the prescriptions because Sutter is part of the arrangement. He has been from the beginning. I thought about every evening for the past 6 years. The herbal tea that arrived at 8 o'clock, with the quiet regularity of a ritual. The way the room would begin to soften at the edges about 40 minutes later. The heaviness that settled behind my eyes that I had called fatigue. The thoughts I had almost followed to their conclusions and let dissolve before they arrived anywhere. The instinct that said something is wrong here, quieted each time by the same tired refrain. You are old. You are not well. That is why she helps. You stopped being able to compose in 2019, my mother said. Do you remember? I remembered. I remembered sitting at this very piano with a pencil and manuscript paper, hearing a phrase in my head, reaching for it, and finding that the connection between the idea and the hand that was supposed to transcribe it had been severed. Not dramatically. Quietly. The way a wire corrodes inside its casing, invisible until the current stops flowing. I had wept that afternoon, alone in this room, believing that the music had simply left me, that I had used up whatever had been given to me and there was nothing remaining. The music had not left me. It had been taken. My mother turned several pages in the journal, stopping at a section marked with a series of sharp symbols. These are the documents, she said. She described 9 of them. Financial authorization, forms granting limited power of attorney over specific accounts within my estate. Management agreements, transferring oversight of property holdings. Investment reallocation instruments. Each one signed on an evening when, according to the dates in her journal, the tea had been prepared and administered, and I had been seated at the back sitting room table with the low lamp and the herbal warmth spreading through my bloodstream like a slow tide. You signed them between March and November of 2019, she said. I watched her bring them to you. I watched you pick up the pen. I watched your hand move across the signature line. The way a hand moves when the mind behind it is not entirely present. I looked at her. You saw my signature? I saw everything, Henry. I was sitting in this room, 15 feet away through an open doorway, and she never once thought to close it. Because I was blind. Because a blind woman at a piano is not a witness. She is scenery. I absorbed that. The image of my mother sitting at the Steinway night after night, eyes open in the dim light, watching through the archway as documents were placed in front of me and signed by a hand that was mine but not mine, watching and recording and saying nothing. For years. The signatures, I said. Were they? They were yours. Every one of them. Your handwriting, your pen pressure, your letter forms. But not your letter forms on a good day. She paused. The W was tight. The B sat below the baseline. The kind of variations that appear when a person is signing under the influence of a sedative compound without being aware of it. She knew my handwriting better than I did. She had watched me sign my name for 70 years. There is one more document, she said. She turned to the final page of the section and held the journal open for me to read. This was not a financial authorization. This was an insurance policy. The entry was dated March 2020. The coverage amount was written in her careful shorthand, translated into standard notation at the margin. $4 million. Life insurance. Issued through a company called Blue Ridge Meridian Life and Estate, headquartered in Atlanta. Policyholder: Henry James Calloway. Beneficiary: Vivian Calloway. Spouse of son. I read the entry twice. The second time, I read it the way I used to read contracts when I served on the university's faculty governance board, looking not at what the language said but at what the structure implied. Blue Ridge Meridian, I said. I have never heard of them. They have been operating for approximately 9 years, my mother said. Licensed, registered, active portfolio. Legitimate enough on the surface. She looked at me with the steady, unblinking focus I was beginning to understand had been present behind those supposedly sightless eyes for 4 years. But the company was not built to sell insurance, Henry. It was built to issue one specific policy. Yours. She paused. And the man who built it is someone you already know. Even if you have spent 15 years trying to forget him. My mother said a name. And the name landed in my chest the way a dissonant chord lands in the middle of a piece you thought you knew by heart. Immediate recognition. The body responding before the mind catches up. A sound that does not belong and yet explains everything that came before it. Grant Mercer, she said. I did not speak. I sat in the leather chair beside the window, with the October light falling across my hands, and felt my jaw tighten without deciding to tighten it. I felt the particular stillness that comes when something you filed away a long time ago suddenly becomes relevant again in a way you did not anticipate. I know that name, I said. I know you do. Grant Mercer. I had not spoken that name aloud in over a decade, but I had never fully succeeded in putting it away. Some names are like that. They sit in the back rooms of your memory. Not because you choose to keep them, but because they attach themselves to something that left a mark, and the mark will not smooth over no matter how many years of silence you lay on top of it. I did not know Grant Mercer directly. I knew his father. Lawrence Mercer had been one of the most prominent music producers in the southeastern United States for the better part of 20 years. Nashville connections. Atlanta, studio relationships. A reputation built on a catalog of work that industry publications described as visionary. I had encountered his name in professional circles for years before I encountered the man himself. When I finally did, it was at the National Composition Awards in the spring of 2009, an event I had served on the adjudication panel for 3 consecutive years. The piece that brought Lawrence Mercer to my attention was a symphonic arrangement, submitted under his name for the competition's premier category. It was, on its surface, impressive. The orchestration was sophisticated, the melodic architecture complex, the harmonic language drawing from late Romantic conventions with a contemporary sensibility that the other judges found compelling. I found it familiar, not in the way that all music within a tradition carries echoes of what came before, in a specific way. The second movement contained a 16-bar passage that I recognized, not from the repertoire, not from a published work, but from a private composition, written by a former doctoral student of mine named David Chen. David had shared the manuscript with me 3 years earlier, seeking feedback before a planned submission. The piece had never been published. It had never been performed. It existed only in manuscript form, in David's files and in mine. I brought my concerns to the panel. The review took 4 weeks. The findings were unambiguous. Lawrence Mercer had obtained access to David Chen's unpublished manuscript through a channel that was never fully determined and had incorporated substantial portions of it into his submission without attribution. Plagiarism, not the ambiguous kind that lives in gray areas of influence and inspiration. The direct, documented kind that ends careers. When the panel delivered its findings, Lawrence Mercer sat in the hearing room with his hands flat on the table and his expression perfectly level. He did not deny it. He did not apologize. He looked at the evidence the way a man looks at a chessboard when the game has already been decided. Not with surprise, but with the cold clarity of someone calculating what comes next. His production license was revoked within 6 months. His studio contracts dissolved. His catalog, which had been his primary source of income and professional identity for 2 decades, was placed under review. Within a year, the name Lawrence Mercer had effectively ceased to exist in the industry he had spent his life building. I remember the last thing he said to me. Not in the hearing room. Afterward, in the corridor outside, where the fluorescent lights gave everything a flat, institutional quality, and the sound of our footsteps on the linoleum was the only noise in either direction. He stopped walking. He turned toward me, and he said, in a voice that was neither loud nor threatening, in the particular tone of a man who is not warning you about a future that might occur, but informing you of one that has already been decided. You will hear from this again. Henry. I had told myself that was the end of Lawrence Mercer. I was wrong. Lawrence Mercer had a son, my mother said from the piano bench, her voice carrying the careful steadiness of someone who has rehearsed a difficult conversation many times in private. Grant, 22 years old at the time of his father's hearing. He had been working as an assistant in his father's production company. When the license was revoked, he lost everything along with it. She paused. The October light had shifted slightly, the sun moving behind a thin band of cloud that lay across the ridgeline, and the room dimmed just enough that the shadows in the corners deepened. After the revocation, Grant Mercer did not stay in the music industry, she continued. He retrained. He obtained a broker's license in insurance and financial services. He built a new practice from the ground up, specializing in high-value life and estate policies. I looked at the journal still open on the music rest. Blue Ridge, Meridian Life, and Estate. $4 million. Policyholder, Henry James Calloway. He built the company that insured me. I said, he built the company specifically to insure you. My mother corrected. There is a difference. One is business. The other is architecture. The words settled in the room the way certain words do when they carry more weight than their syllables suggest. Architecture. A structure designed with a specific purpose, built over years, every element placed deliberately, every load-bearing point calculated in advance, not an opportunistic scheme assembled on the fly. A building. And Vivian, I said. I heard the sentence forming before I had decided to say it. The way a melody sometimes arrives complete before the conscious mind has time to construct it. My mother held my gaze across the length of the piano and said what I already knew but had not yet been able to assemble into language on my own. Vivian was never Daniel's luck, Henry. She was Grant's weapon. He found her. He trained her. And he placed her inside this family like a note written in the wrong key that no one noticed until the whole piece went wrong. My mother turned to a new section of the journal, this one organized differently from the financial entries. The left column held dates. The right column held descriptions. Each entry was marked with a musical notation symbol that I was beginning to understand functioned as a classification system. Quarter notes for movements. Half notes for conversations overheard. Whole notes for significant events. And at the top of the page, written in her careful hand, a title that was not a title but a timeline. The word was simply this: Vivian. She enrolled in your department's continuing education program in the fall of 2014, my mother said. Introduction to Music Theory for Adult Learners, Tuesday and Thursday evenings. I remembered that program. I had established it 12 years before my retirement as a bridge between the university's formal curriculum and the broader community. It drew a range of students, hobbyists mostly, retirees with time and curiosity, occasionally someone younger looking for a foundation before applying to a degree program. I had not taught the introductory section myself in years. By 2014, it was handled by adjunct faculty. I would not have known the name of every student enrolled any more than I would have known the name of every person who walked through the music building on a given Tuesday. But I knew what came next. The charity concert, I said. October 2014. My mother confirmed. The annual benefit for the Asheville Youth Arts Foundation. You asked Daniel to attend on your behalf because you had a faculty meeting that ran late. She looked at me steadily. She was there. She spoke with Daniel for 12 minutes at the reception afterward. She was warm. She was funny. She asked questions about his composition work that demonstrated exactly enough knowledge to be impressive without being threatening. I sat with that image. My son, 43 years old now, 37 then, a talented composer in his own right who had spent most of his career in the particular shadow that falls on the children of accomplished parents. Quieter than I was, more internal. The kind of man who carried his sensitivity close to the surface and did not always know how to protect it. And a woman approaching him at a reception with the precise calibration of someone who had studied her target in advance and knew exactly which frequency to broadcast on. Daniel thought it was luck, I said. Daniel thought a great many things that were not true, my mother said. There was no accusation in her voice. Just the flat acknowledgement of a fact that caused her pain to state. They dated for 14 months. She was attentive and adaptable. She learned his preferences quickly, the restaurants he liked, the composers he admired, the particular way he needed space after a long day of work. She learned this family the way a musician learns a score, not just the notes but the dynamics, the phrasing, the places where the emphasis falls. She paused. They married in February of 2016. She moved into this house within the month. I remembered the wedding. Small, held in the garden behind the house, with the Blue Ridge visible above the tree line. Maggie had sat in the front row wearing a hat she had chosen before she lost her sight, or so we believed, and Vivian had stood beside Daniel in a simple dress and said her vows with a clarity and composure that I had found, at the time, admirable. Once inside the house, my mother continued. She moved quickly. Within 6 months, she had assumed management of the household accounts, the medical scheduling, the maintenance calendar, and the daily operations that a family this size generates. She framed it as generosity. She framed it as freeing you and Daniel to focus on your work. I nodded slowly. I remembered that too. The gradual, seamless transfer of responsibilities that I had not asked for but had accepted because accepting it was easier than questioning it. Because questioning the competence of a woman who appeared to be holding the household together with genuine care would have seemed ungrateful. Because the fog was already beginning, and the fog made everything easier to let go of. When Daniel accepted the position in Nashville in 2017, my mother said she did not go with him. She told him, and she told you, that someone needed to stay and care for the house and for me, that she would not leave a blind woman and a retired man alone in a house this size. I heard the sentence the way you hear a musical phrase played backward. Every note recognizable, the melody intact, but the meaning reversed. What had sounded like devotion now sounded like positioning. What had looked like sacrifice now looked like strategy. She played the piano for us, I said. I do not know why that detail surfaced at that moment, but it did, arriving with the particular force of a memory that has been recontextualized so completely that it becomes almost unbearable. The first evening she spent in this house after the wedding, she sat down at the Steinway and played Clair de Lune. I remembered every face in the room. Daniel standing by the window with a glass of wine, watching his wife with the particular expression of a man who cannot believe his luck. My mother in her chair, her sightless eyes turned toward the sound, her lips slightly parted. And me, standing in the doorway, feeling something I had identified at the time as hope. The hope that this woman might bring music back into the daily rhythm of a house that had grown too quiet. She played every note correctly, my mother said. Every dynamic marking. Every ritardando. Technically, it was a competent performance. She folded her hands. But there was no soul behind it, Henry. I heard it that first evening. The notes were present. The music was not. It was a performance designed to produce a specific emotional response in a family of musicians. And it succeeded because we wanted it to succeed. The room held its silence. I looked at the piano, at the keys Vivian had touched that evening 6 years ago, and I understood that even the music had been a tool. My mother turned another page in the journal. This one had a single entry, written in larger letters than the rest, underlined twice. A name I did not recognize, followed by a city. There was someone before us, Henry, she said. A man in Tucson. His name was Marcus Vargas. She looked up from the page. And what happened to him is exactly what she planned for you. My mother reached into the piano once more. This time, from a different compartment, a narrow space between the soundboard and the inner rim on the bass side, she withdrew a manila envelope. It was old. The edges were soft from handling, the crease across the middle worn to the thinness of fabric. She had opened and closed this envelope many times. She set it on the music rest beside the journal and unfolded the flap. Inside were 3 items: a newspaper clipping, a printed obituary, and a single-page insurance summary that had been folded into thirds. The newspaper clipping was from the Tucson Daily Star, dated January of 2018. The photograph showed a man standing beside a swimming pool in what appeared to be the backyard of a southwestern-style home, the kind with terracotta walls and a low flat roof, and the particular dry clarity of the Arizona desert light behind it. He was smiling broadly, squinting slightly against the sun, his arm extended as though he had just gestured towards something out of frame. The kind of photograph a person takes at a barbecue or a birthday party, unposed and easy, the face of someone comfortable in his own life. His name was Marcus Vargas. He had been 54 years old. The obituary filled in the outline. Commercial real estate, primarily in the greater Tucson metropolitan area. Active in the local business association. Member of the Rotary Club. Survived by his wife. No children. Services held at St. Augustine Cathedral. Interment private. His wife's name at the time of his passing was listed as Natalie Vargas. I looked at the name. Then I looked at my mother. Vivian, she said, reading the question I had not yet asked. Different surname. She used a different identity in Tucson. The legal name change occurred 6 months after his death, before she relocated to North Carolina. I set the clipping down on my knee and picked up the insurance summary. It was a single page, formatted in the standard layout that insurance documentation uses regardless of what it is actually describing. Clean, neutral, designed to present catastrophic information with the visual composure of a utility bill. The policyholder was listed as Marcus Antonio Vargas. The coverage amount was $600,000. The beneficiary was Natalie Vargas, spouse. The cause of death on the attached summary was a sudden cardiac event. No prior diagnosis. No documented warning signs. No autopsy requested. The claim had been processed and paid within 60 days. The broker on the policy, my mother said, was Grant Mercer. Operating under a regional brokerage entity he controlled out of Georgia. Different name than Blue Ridge Meridian. Smaller operation. Same structural template. I held the insurance summary and looked at the photograph of Marcus Vargas, smiling beside his swimming pool in the Tucson sunlight. I tried to see past the smile to whatever had been happening in the months before that photograph was taken. Whether he had noticed his thinking slowing. Whether his tea had begun to taste different. Whether he had sat in his own kitchen on a morning like this one and felt the edges of something he could not name pressing against the walls of his understanding. Whether a woman had stood beside him in that kitchen, composed and attentive and always present, and he had called it love. The attending physician who signed the death certificate, my mother continued, is not affiliated with any legitimate medical practice in Tucson. The name appears on no hospital roster, no clinic directory, no state licensing database. It exists only on that document. The room was very quiet. The October light had gone flat against the windows. The sun fully behind the cloud band now, and the mountains outside had taken on the muted blue-gray they wear when the sky refuses to commit to either brightness or rain. Somewhere in the house, a clock was ticking. I had not noticed it before. I noticed it now. She practiced on him, I said. The words came out flat, without inflection. I was not editorializing. I was not reaching for drama. I was simply stating what the documents, taken together, appeared to indicate. A woman had entered a man's life with a specific purpose, positioned herself beside him with calculated precision, and when the time was right, executed a plan that ended his life and transferred his assets through a mechanism designed to look like routine paperwork. And then she had changed her name, relocated to a different state, and done it again. My mother did not confirm or deny it directly. She held my gaze long enough to tell me she had arrived at the same conclusion years ago and had carried it in silence every day since. We were never the first, I said. We were just the largest. Yes, she said. I sat back in the chair and looked at the river of documents and evidence that had been flowing from inside that piano for the past hour. The journal with its musical notation code, the financial entries, the insurance summary, the photograph of a dead man smiling in the sun. Each piece placed in sequence, each one building on the one before it, each page making the next one harder to dismiss. My mother had not assembled this archive quickly. She had assembled it the way a composer assembles a symphony, movement by movement, measure by measure, over years of patient, deliberate, solitary work, sitting at a piano, listening through the floorboards, writing in a journal no one thought to read because no one believed she could see the page. I looked at the photograph of Marcus Vargas one more time. The broad smile, the easy posture, the sun on his face. Then I looked at my mother. I have not told you the worst part yet, she said. Her voice did not waver, but something in it shifted by a degree so small that only a man who had listened to this woman speak for 70 years would have detected it. A tightening, a gathering, the sound a voice makes when it is preparing to carry something heavier than anything it has carried before. I have not told you why I went blind in the first place. For 9 years I had believed my mother lost her sight to age. Optic nerve degeneration, the specialists had called it. Progressive. Irreversible. Consistent with advanced age and a family history that included my grandmother's own declining vision in her final decade. The diagnosis had arrived with the quiet authority that medical language carries when it is delivered by someone in a white coat with credentials on the wall, and I had accepted it the way I had accepted every piece of difficult news in my life, by folding it into the structure of what I already understood and making room for it. I had watched my mother learn to navigate a house she could no longer see. I had watched her fingers find the edges of door frames, the backs of chairs, the rim of a teacup set exactly where she expected it. I had watched her sit at the piano and play by memory, her hands finding positions that decades of practice had embedded so deeply in the muscle that sight was no longer required. I had described the autumn colors to her every October because she could not see them. I had adjusted the furniture when she stumbled. I had grieved, quietly and continuously, the way you grieve, for something you witness being lost in real time. The specialist who confirmed the diagnosis had been recommended by Vivian. I understood that now. The referral had come in the first months after her arrival in the house, offered with the smooth, considerate efficiency that characterized everything she did. Mother Calloway should see someone about her eyes. I know an excellent practice in town. Let me make the appointment. The eye drops, I said. My voice sounded different to me. Smaller, as though the room had expanded, and I had not expanded with it. Every morning, my mother said. Starting in the spring of 2015, approximately 4 months after she moved into this house. She administered them herself. She told me they were a preservative treatment recommended by the specialist to slow the degeneration. She paused. I could not read the label. I was already losing definition by then. I trusted her because my son's wife was standing in my bedroom, holding a small bottle and speaking to me with kindness, and I had no reason in the world to believe that kindness was not what it appeared to be. The sentence landed with the particular weight of a truth spoken by someone who has had years to examine it from every angle, and has long since exhausted whatever anger or self-recrimination it once carried. What remained was not bitterness. It was clarity, the hard, clean clarity of a fact that cannot be changed, and has therefore been accepted without being forgiven. The compound was a neurotoxic agent that targets the optic nerve, she said. Low concentration, administered daily through a delivery mechanism that any ophthalmologist would recognize as a standard preservative eye drop. Over a period of months, it produces progressive visual impairment indistinguishable from age-related degeneration. She had described the theft of her own sight, the way a pathologist describes the mechanism of a disease. Precisely. Without ornament, without the weight that a less disciplined person might have allowed to press down on the words. She blinded me deliberately, Henry. And she did it first, before anything else. Because I was the one person in this house who would have seen what she was doing. I sat with that sentence for a long time. Not seconds. Not a pause. A long, sustained interval in which the entire architecture of the past 9 years rebuilt itself inside my understanding with a different set of load-bearing walls. My mother had not lost her sight to age. She had lost it to the same woman who was now poisoning me. And she had lost it because Vivian had identified her, correctly, as the most dangerous person in the house. Not me. Not Danielle, the 93-year-old woman at the piano with eyes that missed nothing. Vivian had neutralized the threat before beginning the operation. She had removed my mother's sight the way a burglar disables an alarm system before entering a building. Quietly. Professionally. First. When did it stop? I asked. The drops changed in early 2018, my mother said. The bottle looked the same. The label looked the same. But the sensation was different. Milder. I noticed it, but could not explain it. She folded her hands on the edge of the piano. I believe she reformulated the compound, or simply replaced it with an inert solution. Once she had shifted her primary focus to you. The tea had begun. I was no longer the priority, and your sight came back. Slowly. Very slowly. Shadows first, late in 2019. Like looking through water. Then shapes. Outlines. The edge of a door frame. The rectangle of a window. By the spring of 2020, I could distinguish faces at close range. By the summer, I could read. She stopped. The pause that followed was not empty. It was the kind of pause that precedes the most important sentence in a piece of music, the fermata that tells the performer to hold, to wait, to let the silence do its work before the resolution arrives. The first clear thing I saw in 5 years, she said, and her voice dropped to the register I had heard once before this morning. The register that exists just below normal speech, held there deliberately, was your daughter-in-law standing at the kitchen counter on a Tuesday evening in June of 2020, holding a glass vial over the teapot and adding 3 drops of a liquid that was not tea into the water. She looked at me across the piano. 93 years old. 9 years of engineered darkness. 5 years of genuine blindness, followed by 4 years of chosen silence. And the first thing the returning light had shown her was the face of the woman who had taken it, standing in the kitchen of the house they shared, poisoning her son. So I made a decision, she said. Her hands were still on the piano, resting on the wood beside the keys, the hands of a woman who had played this instrument for 80 years and had now found a different use for the patience that music requires. I would not tell anyone I could see. I would sit in this house, beside this piano, and I would watch, and I would remember everything. She held my gaze, and in her eyes, clear and sharp and carrying the full, undimmed authority of a woman who had spent 4 years in voluntary darkness for the sole purpose of protecting her son. I saw something I did not have the language for yet, something larger than courage, something quieter than rage, something that had been built in silence, in the dark, one day at a time, the way the most important things are always built. 4 years. 1,460 nights. That is how long my mother sat beside the Steinway in the darkness after the house went quiet. Her eyes open, her hands still, her attention tuned to a frequency that no one else in that house knew existed. She told me about the discovery first. It had been an accident, or what passes for an accident. When a mind as disciplined as hers encounters information it was not seeking but immediately understands the value of. In the autumn of 2020, a few months after her vision had clarified enough to read labels and faces and the particular expressions people wear when they believe no one is watching, she had been sitting at the piano late one evening. The house was quiet. Vivian's light had gone off upstairs at 11:15, the time it always went off. The floorboards had settled into their nighttime silence, the old wood contracting in the cooling air the way it had done every evening for 100 years. Maggie had placed her hands on the keys. Not to play, to rest. The way she had always rested her hands there, the way a person returns to a familiar surface, the way they return to a familiar thought, without intention, simply because the body knows where to go. And she heard something, not through the air, through the piano itself. The Steinway's lid was open, as it usually was, the long curved wing raised on its prop stick, the strings exposed to the room. And through those strings, transmitted upward from the old-growth oak floorboards that ran continuously from the kitchen through the dining room and into the music room without a single break in the grain, came a voice, Vivian's voice. Speaking on the phone in the kitchen, 2 rooms and 40 feet away, in a tone low enough that it would not have carried through the air to anyone standing in the hallway between them, but the floorboards carried it. The vibration traveled through the dense, century-old wood, the way sound travels through water, with a clarity and fidelity that the open air could not match. The piano's strings, sensitive to the slightest resonance, received the vibration and amplified it into something that a trained ear, positioned at the instrument, could distinguish as clearly as a whispered conversation across a small table. My mother had spent 80 years listening to music through this piano. She knew its resonances the way a conductor knows the acoustic signature of a concert hall. She understood immediately what she had found. The piano became my microphone, she said. Every conversation she had in the kitchen, in the dining room, in the back hallway, came through the floor and into the strings. I did not need recording equipment. I needed patience and a notebook. The journal, the Braille music journal that everyone in the house had seen her carry, had watched her write in, had assumed contained the private musical notations of a blind woman reaching for a craft she could no longer fully practice. No one questioned it. No one opened it. No one considered the possibility that the small, meticulous entries were not compositions but transcriptions. She told me about the system she developed. Each evening, after the house quieted and Vivian believed everyone was either asleep or sedated, my mother would position herself at the piano with the journal on the music rest and the lid open at its full height. She would sit motionless, sometimes for 3 or 4 hours, her hands resting on the wood beside the keys, her eyes adjusted to the dark, listening to whatever the floorboards carried up from below. She recorded conversations between Vivian and Grant Mercer, conducted by phone in the kitchen at hours when the household was assumed to be unconscious. She recorded Vivian's instructions to Dr. Sutter, delivered in the clipped, administrative tone of a woman managing a logistics operation. She recorded the specific language Vivian used when discussing the timeline, the dosage adjustments, the financial instruments, and the condition of the man upstairs who she referred to, consistently and without variation, as the old man. Every entry was coded in musical notation. Names rendered as note sequences, dates as time signatures, dollar amounts as dynamic markings. A system so thoroughly embedded in the language of music that anyone who opened the journal and did not possess the specific key to its translation would see nothing but the scattered notations of an elderly composer working through fragments of melody in the dark. I also began changing the tea, she said. Not every night. She checked the levels. She knew approximately how much should be consumed each day, and a sudden change would have been noticed. But on the nights when I could reach the kitchen undetected, I would replace a portion of the steeped tea with plain herbal water from a second pot I kept in the back of the pantry. She looked at me. That is why some mornings were clearer than others, Henry. That is why the fog sometimes lifted for a day or two before it returned. It was not your brain recovering on its own. It was me, reducing the dosage when I could, giving you back as much of yourself as I could manage without revealing that I was doing it. I thought about those mornings. The rare days when the world felt almost sharp again, when I could hold a thought from beginning to end without losing the thread, when the music in my head approached something that might have been written down if I had trusted it enough to try. I had attributed those mornings to random variation, to the body's unpredictable resilience, to luck. It had not been luck. It had been my 93-year-old mother, moving through a dark kitchen in the hours before dawn, pouring out poison and replacing it with clean water, one night at a time. She told me about the summer of 2021, a night in July, warm and still, the kind of Appalachian summer night when the air does not move and the walls of old houses hold the day's heat long into the darkness. She had been at the piano since midnight. At 1:45 in the morning, the floorboards carried Vivian's voice up from the kitchen with perfect clarity. The old man is losing it faster than I expected. Another year at most. A pause. A man's voice on the other end, too compressed by the phone speaker for my mother to identify with certainty, but the cadence was one she had heard before. Measured. Deliberate. Grant Mercer. Then we stay the course, Vivian said. My mother placed her hand flat on the piano's rim, pressed until the wood grain was solid under her palm, and did not move for a long time. Then she opened the journal and began to write. But I could not do this alone, she said, looking at me now with an expression I was beginning to recognize as the face she wore when the next piece of information was going to change the shape of everything that had come before it. I needed someone outside these walls. I needed Daniel. The problem was finding a way to reach him that she would never think to monitor. The silence in the music room pressed against the walls like something living. My mother's fingers rested on the piano keys, but did not play. She looked at me the way she had been looking at me for 4 years without my knowledge, with full, clear sight. I needed to reach Daniel, she said. But I could not use a telephone. I could not use a computer. Vivian monitored every device in this house. She checked the call history on the landline every evening at 9:15. She examined the browser history on your desktop every Sunday morning. She had installed an application on your mobile phone that forwarded every text message to a second number I eventually identified as Grant Mercer's. I opened my mouth to ask how she knew this, but the answer was already embedded in everything she had told me. The piano, the oak floors, the vibrations that carried whispered conversations from the kitchen to the parlor strings. I had one channel she could not monitor. My mother continued. Music. She opened the Braille journal to a page near the middle. The raised dots were denser here. Arranged in clusters, I did not recognize as standard musical notation. She ran her fingers across them, not for reading she could see, but from habit, the way a person touches a scar long after it has healed. In March of 2021, I composed a piece, a lullaby. I called it Autumn Leaves on the Cooper River. It was 7 minutes and 42 seconds long. I told Vivian it was a gift for Patricia Novak. Patricia and I had been exchanging sheet music by mail for 30 years. Vivian saw no threat in an old woman sending a composition to another old woman. Patricia Novak. I remembered the name. A retired music professor from Vanderbilt University, living in a small house outside of Nashville. She and my mother had been correspondents since the 1980s, trading arrangements and critiques through the postal service like two generals, exchanging maps of distant campaigns. But the lullaby was not a lullaby, I said. No. My mother's voice carried the faintest edge of pride. Every fourth measure contained a substitution cipher. The melody line used standard notation, but the harmony, the left-hand accompaniment, encoded English text. Each note corresponded to a letter. A was middle C, B was C sharp, and so on through the chromatic scale. The time signature of each section encoded a date. 4-4 meant the fourth month. 3-4 meant the third. The dynamic markings pianissimo, mezzo forte, fortissimo encoded dollar amounts on a logarithmic scale. I designed myself. I stared at her. My 93-year-old mother had invented a cryptographic system based on Western musical notation and embedded it inside a 7-minute lullaby. Patricia decoded it in less than 48 hours, my mother said. She had always been better at theory than I was. She called your brother Daniel that same evening. Daniel. My son. The one Vivian had systematically removed from my life beginning in 2016. The one I had not spoken to in nearly 7 years. The one whose absence I had attributed to his own failures rather than to a campaign of deliberate isolation engineered by the woman who made my tea every morning. Daniel did not believe her at first. My mother said. Patricia told him his grandmother had sent a piece of music containing allegations of poisoning, insurance fraud, and attempted murder. He thought Patricia was experiencing cognitive decline. He nearly called her daughter to express concern. What changed his mind? Patricia played the lullaby for him over the phone. She played the melody line first. Then she played only the harmony. Even without the cipher key, Daniel could hear that the left hand was wrong. It did not follow any harmonic logic. It moved in patterns that were linguistic, not musical. He is your son, Henry. He has your ear. My mother turned a page in the journal. The next section was written not in Braille, but in standard pencil notation. Small, precise, in handwriting I recognized as my mother's pre-blindness script from decades ago. Daniel flew to Nashville the following weekend. He sat in Patricia's kitchen for 6 hours, while she walked him through the cipher. When he finished reading the decoded text, he did not speak for 11 minutes. Patricia counted. She paused. In the silence, I heard the October wind push against the bay window, and somewhere in the garden a branch scraped against the wraparound porch railing. The decoded message was 412 words, my mother continued. It contained the following information. The name and composition of the substance being added to your tea, the 9 documents you had signed while impaired, the existence of a $4 million life insurance policy issued by a company called Blue Ridge Meridian that had no physical offices and no verifiable history, the name Grant Mercer and his connection to every element, and the name Natalie Caruso Vivian's birth name, along with her connection to the death of Marcus Vargas in Tucson in January of 2018. 412 words. Encoded in a lullaby. Mailed through the United States Postal Service. Decoded by a 78-year-old retired music professor in Tennessee. Daniel contacted the Federal Bureau of Investigation the following Monday, my mother said. He asked to speak with someone in the Financial Crimes Division. He was referred to a field agent named Claire Whitmore, based in the Charlotte office. Agent Whitmore listened to Daniel for 2 hours. She requested a copy of the decoded message. She requested a copy of the original sheet music. She requested Patricia Novak's methodology notes. And Agent Whitmore opened a preliminary inquiry on the 14th of April, 2021. Case number WF-21-0414. She assigned a forensic accountant to trace the registration of Blue Ridge Meridian. She assigned a second agent to compile a file on Grant Mercer's insurance brokerage activities across 4 states. And she requested through Daniel that I continue collecting evidence. My mother closed the journal. She placed both hands flat on the piano lid, and I noticed for the first time that her hands were trembling. Not from frailty, from the weight of what she had carried alone. The federal government asked a 90-year-old blind woman to be a confidential informant inside her own home, I said. They asked a 90-year-old woman who could see, she corrected. There is a difference. And I did not do it for the government, Henry. I did it for you. She opened the piano bench and withdrew a second envelope thicker than the first, sealed with packing tape, written on the front, in her small, sure handwriting. For Agent Claire Whitmore, Evidence Packet 2 of 6. Over the next 11 days, my mother said, Agent Whitmore obtained a federal warrant. And in those 11 days, I composed 5 more pieces of music. Each one contained a progress report. Each one was mailed to Patricia, decoded, and forwarded to Daniel, who relayed the contents to Agent Whitmore by secure telephone. 6 lullabies. 6 encoded intelligence reports. Transmitted through sheet music, decoded by a retired professor, relayed by a son who had been told his father no longer wanted to see him. The warrant was signed on the 25th of April, 2021, my mother said. But Agent Whitmore told Daniel it was not yet sufficient to arrest. She needed more. She needed financial records. She needed recorded conversations. She needed physical evidence of the substance in your tea. My mother looked at the Steinway the way a soldier looks at the weapon that kept them alive through a long winter. So I kept listening, she said. And the piano kept telling me everything. My mother did not tell me the next part immediately. She stood from the piano bench slowly, one hand on the lacquered wood, the other pressing against her thigh, and walked to the bay window. October light caught the side of her face, and I saw the scar above her left eyebrow that I had never asked about. I had assumed she got it from a fall. I was half right. Winter of 2021, she said. December the 14th. A Wednesday. Cold rain had been sitting on the mountains since Monday. She touched the scar with 2 fingers, lightly, the way someone tests whether a wound still hurts. Vivian was on the telephone with Grant Mercer for 22 minutes that evening. I was in the parlor with the piano lid open, and the floor carried every word. Grant told her the timeline was too slow. He said your cognitive decline was not progressing fast enough. He said, and I will give you his exact words because I wrote them in the journal that same night. We need a medical evaluation on record. Something from a hospital. Something that says he cannot manage his own affairs. If we get that, the guardianship filing takes 60 to 90 days, and the old man is ours. My mother turned from the window. The muscle in her jaw was tight. Vivian asked how they would get you into a hospital without suspicion. Grant said a fall would be ideal. An elderly man slips on wet stairs, hits his head, gets taken to the emergency room. A sympathetic physician orders a neurological workup. The results combined with benzodiazepine already in your system would show significant impairment. I felt my hands close into fists on my knees. Not from anger. From the recognition that I had lived through exactly this and never questioned it. December the 16th. Thursday evening, 6:45. The staircase was wet. Not from rain. Vivian had mopped the hardwood stairs at 6:30. Which she had never done on a Thursday. She always mopped on Saturdays. A blind woman notices routines the way a sighted person notices colors. When the routine changes, something is wrong. I remembered the fall. My left foot finding nothing where the step should have been, the banister slipping through my fingers, then the impact shoulder first, then ribs, then the back of my skull against the hardwood landing. I heard you fall, my mother said. The sound traveled through the bones of this house. Wood, to wood, to wood. I heard the impact, and then nothing for 4 seconds. Those were the longest 4 seconds of my life, because I did not know if you were alive. And Vivian? She was in the kitchen. She did not come to the staircase for 19 seconds. I counted. A woman whose father-in-law has just fallen down 12 stairs waited 19 seconds before responding. When she came, she said exactly the right things. Oh my God, Henry. Don't move. I'm calling 911. Every word correct. The tone correct. A performance. The same way her Claire de Lune was a performance. Technically flawless and completely hollow. The ambulance took me to Mission Hospital. I remembered fragments, fluorescent lights. A nurse asking me to count backward from 100. The cold gel of an imaging machine. 2 fractured ribs on the left side. A mild concussion. Bruising along the right shoulder. Dr. Raymond Sutter was on call, my mother said. The same Sutter whose name appears on 6 of the 9 documents. He ordered a standard neurological assessment for the concussion, but he also ordered a secondary cognitive evaluation, a Montreal cognitive assessment, and a capacity screening that is not standard for a simple fall. How do you know what he ordered? Because I was there. She said it the way one states an obvious fact. Vivian drove me to the hospital. She could not leave a 92-year-old blind woman alone overnight. So I sat in the waiting room with my dark glasses and my cane. And I listened. When the nurse wheeled you past me toward radiology, I followed the sound of the wheels. She had walked hospital corridors guided by the squeak of rubber on linoleum, the hum of the MRI suite, nurses calling room numbers. She found the consultation room where Sutter was preparing the cognitive forms. I knocked on the door. I told him I was your mother and wanted to be present during any evaluation. He looked at Vivian. Vivian looked at me. And for the first time in 6 years, I saw something in her face that was not a performance. It was fear. Sutter allowed my mother to sit in the room. A 92-year-old blind woman posed no apparent risk. He began the assessment. I answered through the fog of a concussion and years of chemical accumulation. You scored 21 out of 30. Below 26 indicates impairment. That score would have given Grant exactly what he needed for the guardianship filing. Would have? I interrupted the evaluation. No apology in her voice. I told Sutter you had been taking herbal supplements that might affect results. I told him the assessment should be repeated after a washout period. I told him I would file a formal objection with patient advocacy if the results were entered without that notation. I made myself a blind, elderly, irrelevant woman into a procedural obstacle he could not remove. Sutter noted the objection. He flagged the evaluation as preliminary and recommended a follow-up in 30 days. That follow-up never happened. Vivian could not risk my mother being present again. I bought you time, my mother said. 30 days. But Grant would not wait forever. And Vivian learned something that night. She did not know I could see, but she knew I could think. That made me dangerous. My mother returned to the piano bench and opened the journal to a page I had not seen. The braille was denser here. The dots pressed deeper, as though written with urgency. After that night, Vivian changed the locks on your medicine drawer. A combination lock. 4 digits. She thought I could not see the combination. A thin smile crossed my mother's face. Not amusement. The smile of a woman who had been underestimated for the last time. She was wrong. And what she left in that drawer is what will end this. My mother asked me to follow her upstairs. She did not use her cane. She did not reach for the banister. She climbed the staircase, the same 12 mahogany steps, where I had fractured 2 ribs with the deliberate steadiness of a woman who had been walking in secret for 4 years. I followed her, and with each step, I understood more clearly how complete the deception had been. Not Vivian's deception, my mother's. The necessary one. We reached the second-floor hallway. The medicine drawer was built into a cabinet beside the guest bathroom. An antique walnut piece my grandmother had purchased in 1953. Vivian had installed a small combination padlock on the top drawer sometime after December of 2021. I had noticed it once and asked her about it. She told me it was to prevent accidental mixing of medications. I had accepted that explanation the way I had accepted everything else. Without question, my mother stopped in front of the cabinet. She reached for the lock and turned the dial without hesitation. 4 digits. 7, 3, 1, 9. Her birthday, my mother said. July 3rd, 1990. She used her own birthday as the combination because she believed no one in this house knew it. I read it on her driver's license 2 years ago. She left her purse on the kitchen counter while she was on the phone with Grant. Careless. The only time she was ever careless. The lock opened with a small click that sounded much larger than it was. Inside the drawer were 3 shelves. The top shelf held my daily medications, blood pressure, cholesterol, a mild sleep aid prescribed by Dr. Sutter. The middle shelf held a row of vitamin bottles. The bottom shelf held a single amber prescription bottle with a white label. My mother picked it up and held it toward me. The label read, Digoxin, 0.25 milligrams. Take 1 tablet daily. Dr. Raymond Sutter. Dispensed by Blue Ridge Pharmacy. I have never been prescribed digoxin. I said. No, my mother said. You have not. Digoxin is a cardiac glycoside. In therapeutic doses, it regulates heart rhythm. In elevated doses, particularly in a 70-year-old man already taking blood pressure medication, it causes fatal arrhythmia. The death presents as a sudden cardiac event. Natural causes. No autopsy required in North Carolina unless the attending physician or the medical examiner requests one. She placed the bottle in my hand. It was nearly full. I counted through the orange plastic. 26 tablets. Vivian filled this prescription on September the 8th of this year, my mother said. 5 weeks ago. She used a prescription pad she took from Dr. Sutter's office during a visit in August. I know this because I followed her to the pharmacy. Not physically. I read the receipt she left in her coat pocket. Blue Ridge Pharmacy, Fletcher, North Carolina. Prescription number 774312. Filled under your name, paid in cash. My mother opened the Braille journal to a page near the back. This section was different from the others. The entries were shorter, more urgent, written in a compressed notation she had not used in earlier pages. September the 8th, she read. Digoxin acquired. 28 tablets. September the 14th. Vivian places bottle in medicine drawer behind the vitamin row. She believes I cannot see it. September the 22nd, Vivian moves the bottle to the front of the bottom shelf. She is preparing. October the 1st, Vivian books a flight to Atlanta. Departure October the 4th. Return October the 11th. 1 week. My mother closed the journal and looked at me with an expression I had never seen on her face before. It was not anger. It was not fear. It was the cold, precise focus of someone who has been solving an equation for 4 years and has finally reached the last variable. The plan is simple, she said. Vivian leaves for Atlanta on October the 4th. That is today. While she is gone, someone, either Grant or a person Grant sends, will come to this house. That person will add digoxin to your evening tea, not all 26 tablets. 6 to 8 would be sufficient. You will drink the tea. You will experience chest pain within 2 to 4 hours. You will go into cardiac arrest. By the time anyone finds you, it will be over. She paused. The house was silent, except for the October wind against the bay windows. Vivian will be in Atlanta with 14 witnesses at her sister's wedding. Grant will be at his office in Charlotte with a documented schedule. Dr. Sutter will sign the death certificate. Cause of death, sudden cardiac event. The $4 million life insurance policy through Blue Ridge Meridian will pay out within 90 days. Vivian, as your daughter-in-law and designated beneficiary on the documents you signed while impaired, will collect the full amount. And the house? The house, the land, the investment accounts, and the Steinway. My mother said the last word as though it were the name of a person she loved. Everything goes to Vivian through the guardianship documents already prepared. Grant takes his percentage. Dr. Sutter takes his fee. And Henry James Calloway becomes another old man who died alone in a beautiful house on a mountain. I looked at the bottle in my hand. 26 tablets of a drug I had never been prescribed, filled under my name by a woman who had kissed my forehead every morning for 8 years and called me Dad. Why didn't you take the bottle? I asked. Why didn't you remove it? Because Agent Whitmore told me not to. My mother's voice was steady. The bottle. is evidence. Its presence in this drawer, filled under a forged prescription, paid in cash, placed by Vivian, that is a prosecutable act. If I remove it, it becomes my word against hers. If I leave it and document its movement, it becomes a federal exhibit. She reached into the piano bench we had returned to the music room, though I barely remembered descending the stairs, and withdrew a small plastic bag containing a single white tablet. I did take one, she said. On September the 15th, the day after Vivian placed the bottle, I wore gloves. I sealed it in this bag. I labeled it with the date and my initials. This tablet is currently the only physical sample of the substance Agent Whitmore needs to connect Grant Mercer, Dr. Sutter, and Vivian to a conspiracy to commit murder. She placed the bag on the piano lid. It sat there between us, a single white pill on black lacquer, no larger than a pencil eraser, containing enough chemistry to stop my heart. The upload, my mother said. That is what matters now. Daniel has assembled every document, every journal entry, every decoded lullaby, every photograph, and every recording into a single encrypted file. That file must reach Agent Whitmore's secure server before Grant Mercer reaches this house. When is Grant coming? My mother looked at the clock on the mantel. It was 11:47 in the morning. Tonight, she said. He will come tonight. My mother did not move from the piano bench. She placed one hand on the fallboard, the long piece of hinged wood that covers the keys when the instrument is closed, and pressed it with her fingertips, the way a person touches the lid of a coffin before it is sealed. There is one more thing inside this piano, she said. And it is the reason I have not let anyone tune it since 1997. I looked at the Steinway. It had been in our family since my grandfather purchased it, in 1941, from a dealer in Philadelphia. A Model B, 6 feet 11 inches, with an ebony case that had aged into a depth of black that seemed to absorb the light around it. My mother had played it every day of her sighted life. When she went blind, she played it by memory. When she regained her sight, she played it as a weapon. In 1997, my mother said, "Your father and I rewrote our wills. Both of us. We did this without attorneys. We did it at the kitchen table, on a Sunday afternoon in March. Your father was 74. I was 64. We had just attended the funeral of a friend, Arthur Pennington. You remember him who died intestate, and whose family spent 2 years in court dividing an estate worth less than the legal fees it generated. Your father said he would not let that happen to us. I remembered Arthur Pennington, a kind man who built furniture in a workshop behind his house on Marymount Avenue, and never once considered the possibility that his children would fight over his table saw. We wrote 2 wills. Holographic wills, handwritten, dated, signed, and witnessed by each other. Legal in North Carolina, without notarization. Your father's will left everything to me, with you as secondary beneficiary. My will left everything to you, with Daniel as secondary beneficiary. We signed them. We dated them. And then your father did something I did not understand at the time. She lifted the fallboard. Then she reached beneath the piano, her arm disappearing into the narrow space between the case and the soundboard. I heard her fingers brush against wood, then paper, then something that crinkled like old wax. She withdrew a flat package wrapped in a brown wax paper envelope. It was no larger than a sheet of legal stationery. The wax paper had yellowed, but remained intact. On the front, in my father's precise draftsman's handwriting, were 4 words. For Henry. Inside only. Your father placed this inside the piano on the same afternoon we wrote the wills, my mother said. He told me it was the safest place in the house. He said no one who did not love this instrument would ever think to look inside it. He said the piano would keep it. I took the envelope. The wax paper was brittle at the edges, but the seal held. I broke it carefully and removed 2 sheets of paper. The first was my father's will, handwritten on lined yellow legal paper, dated March the 16th, 1997, signed by Thomas Edward Calloway, and witnessed by Margaret Rose Calloway. The second was my mother's will, same paper, same date, signed and witnessed in reverse. The wills were clear, direct, written in the plain language of a man who built buildings for a living and did not trust ornamental words. Everything to the surviving spouse, then everything to Henry James Calloway, then everything to Daniel Thomas Calloway. No conditions, no trusts, no intermediaries. These wills, I said, they supersede everything Vivian had me sign. Yes. My mother's voice was quiet but absolute. A holographic will, properly executed and witnessed, is valid in North Carolina. The 9 documents you signed while under the influence of benzodiazepine can be challenged on grounds of diminished capacity. But even without that challenge, these wills establish a clear chain of testamentary intent that predates every document Grant Mercer fabricated. I held the papers in my hands and felt the weight of them, not physical weight, but the weight of my father's handwriting, his certainty, his belief that a piano could protect what mattered. Agent Whitmore knows about the wills, my mother continued. I described them in the 4th lullaby, the one I sent to Patricia in May of 2021. Daniel confirmed their location to Whitmore by telephone, but no one has touched them until now. They have been inside this piano for 27 years. 27 years. Through my father's death in 2003, through my mother's blindness, through Vivian's arrival and the slow poisoning and the 9 fraudulent documents and the fall on the staircase and the digoxin in the medicine drawer. Through all of it, the piano had kept my father's last instructions safe inside its body like a heartbeat no one could hear. There is a reason I am showing you this now, my mother said. She took the wills from my hands and placed them back inside the wax paper envelope. Then she reached beneath the piano again and returned the envelope to its hiding place. When Grant Mercer arrives tonight, he will come for the documents in your study. He believes those are the only legal instruments governing your estate. He does not know about these wills. Vivian does not know. Dr. Sutter does not know. No one outside of this family and Agent Whitmore knows that Thomas Calloway hid his last wishes inside a 1941 Steinway Model B. She closed the fallboard. The sound was soft, felt against ivory, then wood against wood. A closing that was also a keeping. Now, my mother said. She turned to face the laptop that sat on the small table beside the piano. I had not noticed it before. A thin silver machine, its screen dark, connected by a single cable to a portable hard drive no larger than a deck of cards. We need to talk about the upload. She opened the laptop. The screen illuminated her face in pale blue light. And for a moment, she looked not like a 93-year-old woman but like someone timeless, ageless, defined not by years, but by the precision of what she had built in silence. Daniel prepared this 6 months ago, she said. Every document, every journal page, every decoded lullaby, every photograph I took with a camera I hid inside the piano bench, every recording the floor delivered to me through the strings. 4 years of evidence, encrypted and compressed into a single file. 147 megabytes. She typed a password. The screen changed. A progress bar appeared. Empty. Waiting. The file must reach 3 servers. One in Charlotte, Agent Whitmore's secure terminal. One in Washington, the FBI Financial Crimes Archive. One in Richmond, a backup maintained by the Department of Justice. When all 3 uploads complete, the evidence is beyond anyone's reach. Grant cannot delete it. Vivian cannot deny it. Dr. Sutter cannot unsign it. My mother placed her hand on the touchpad. But the upload will take time, she said. And Grant Mercer is not a patient man. My mother pressed the touchpad once. The progress bar filled with a thin blue line that moved so slowly it seemed painted onto the screen rather than advancing across it. Beneath the bar, white text on a dark background read, "Uploading to server 1 of 3 Charlotte. NC 0.3% complete. Estimated time remaining. 4 hours 12 minutes. 4 hours. I looked at the clock on the mantel. 12:17 in the afternoon. If the estimate held, the first server would receive the complete file by 4:30. The second and third uploads would follow sequentially. Daniel had designed them that way, my mother explained, because simultaneous transfers from this location would draw bandwidth attention that could be traced. Each upload would take approximately the same duration, 12 hours total. The final server in Richmond would not confirm receipt until after midnight. Grant will not wait until midnight, I said. No. My mother watched the progress bar, the way a surgeon watches a monitor during a long operation. Grant's flight from Charlotte lands in Asheville at 6:15 this evening. I know this because Daniel has been monitoring his travel bookings through a contact at the airline. Grant reserved a rental car at the Asheville Regional Airport under the name Lawrence Mercer, his father's name. He does not know we know this. He believes Vivian is in Atlanta. You are alone and medicated, and I am blind and irrelevant. What happens when he gets here? He has a key. My mother said it without emotion. Vivian gave him a copy of the front door key in August of 2023. I watched her hand it to him through the kitchen window. They were standing beside his car in the driveway. She passed it to him the way someone passes a piece of gum quickly, casually, as though it were nothing. I noted the date, the time, and the make of his vehicle in the journal. Gray Lexus sedan, South Carolina plates. 8:47 in the morning. The progress bar reached 1%. The estimated time adjusted to 4 hours and 9 minutes. The numbers meant nothing and everything simultaneously. Grant will enter through the front door. My mother continued. He will go directly to your study on the 3rd floor. He will access the filing cabinet where you keep your legal and financial documents. He will remove anything that contradicts the 9 documents already signed specifically. Any previous wills, any power of attorney designations predating Vivian's, and any correspondence with your former attorney, William Chen, who retired in 2020. How do you know his plan? Because I heard him rehearse it. The piano. Always the piano. 3 weeks ago, on a Thursday evening, Grant called Vivian at 9:30. He walked through the entire sequence. He said, I will read from the journal. I go in Friday night. The old man will be asleep by 9 if you dose the tea right. I take the Chen files, the original power of attorney, and anything with a date before 2019. I'm in and out in 20 minutes. By the time he wakes up Saturday morning, there's no paper trail left that contradicts our documents. My mother turned a page. Vivian said, What about his mother? Grant laughed. He said, What about her? She's 93 and blind. She won't even know I'm there. The progress bar reached 2%. 3 hours and 58 minutes remaining on server 1. I stood from the chair and walked to the bay window. The Blue Ridge Mountains held the afternoon light, in layers green at the base, blue at the ridgeline, white where the clouds met the peaks. It was the kind of view my father had chosen this house for. He said a man should be able to see far enough from his own window to know what weather was coming. Agent Whitmore's team, I said. Where are they? 3 vehicles. My mother said. Daniel confirmed the positions by telephone at 7 this morning, while Vivian was loading her car. 1 unmarked sedan on Mountain View Road, approximately 400 yards east of our driveway. 1 SUV parked at the Sunset Mountain trailhead, which has a clear line of sight to our front gate through the tree line, and 1 vehicle Agent Whitmore's parked in the lot of the Baptist Church on Macon Avenue, 1.2 miles from this house. They've been here since this morning? They arrived at 5:45 a.m. Before dawn. Before Vivian left. Agent Whitmore wanted eyes on the property before any movement began. She watched Vivian's car leave the driveway at 7:22. She confirmed Vivian's departure by text message to Daniel, who relayed it to me through Patricia's landline at 7:31. The network. The invisible architecture my mother had built across 4 years, piano to journal to lullaby to Patricia to Daniel to Whitmore, was now a living, operational structure with positions and sight lines and confirmation protocols. A 93-year-old woman had become the central node of a federal surveillance operation run from a piano bench. What do we do until 6:15? I asked. "We wait," my mother said. And we watched that bar move. She was right. There was nothing else to do. The evidence was transferring. The agents were positioned. Grant was airborne. Vivian was in Atlanta. Every piece was placed. The only variable was time, whether 147 megabytes of encrypted truth could reach 3 government servers before a man with a copied key walked through the front door of a house he intended to rob. The progress bar reached 4%. I sat beside my mother on the piano bench. She did not play. She rested her hands on the closed fallboard and watched the screen. Occasionally, she glanced at the clock. Occasionally, she glanced at the driveway through the window. The magnolia trees along the gravel path stood motionless in the October stillness. At 1:45, the progress bar reached 19%. At 2:30, it reached 31%. The connection was stable but slow. The house's internet service had never been upgraded because Vivian had argued against it. And now, I understood why. A faster connection would have made many things easier, including escape. At 3:12, my mother's telephone rang. Not the landline. A small prepaid mobile phone she withdrew from the piano bench, another object hidden inside the instrument, another secret the Steinway had kept. She answered it. Listened for 9 seconds. Said, "Understood." Closed it. "Daniel," she said. Grant's flight landed 12 minutes early. He picked up the rental car at 5:58. He is on Interstate 26 heading west. Estimated arrival 47 minutes. I looked at the screen. Server 1. 68% complete. Estimated time remaining. 1 hour and 22 minutes. The math was simple and merciless. Grant would arrive before the first upload finished. My mother looked at me. Her eyes, those clear, seeing, patient eyes, held no panic. Only calculation. "We need to slow him down," she said. And I know exactly how. My mother's plan was not complicated. The best deceptions never are. When Grant arrives, she said, he will find a dark house. He will find the front door unlocked, because I will unlock it. He will find you asleep in the armchair in the front parlor, with a cup of tea on the side table beside you. He will find me in my bedroom on the second floor with the door closed, presumably asleep, presumably blind, presumably irrelevant. You want me to pretend to be sedated. I want you to be exactly what Grant expects you to be. A 70-year-old man who drank his evening tea and fell asleep in front of the fireplace. If you are asleep, Grant has no reason to rush. He will move through the house at his own pace. He will go to the study. He will open the filing cabinet. He will take what he came for. And every minute he spends doing that is a minute the upload continues. She pointed to the laptop screen. Server 1. 74%. Estimated time remaining. 59 minutes. The progress bar had become a second heartbeat in the room, steady and indifferent to the emergency building around it. The laptop stays here, she said. In the music room. Grant has no reason to enter this room. He has never shown interest in music, in the piano, or in anything that does not carry a $sign. The door will be closed. The screen brightness will be turned to its lowest setting. The upload will continue in silence. And Agent Whitmore? Whitmore's team will not move until Grant is inside the house. That is the protocol. Daniel confirmed it this morning. The federal warrant authorizes surveillance, entry observation, and arrest upon evidence of criminal trespass, combined with intent to commit fraud or theft. Grant must physically enter this house with the copied key, physically access your documents, and physically remove materials from the premises. Only then does the warrant activate. I understood. The law required Grant to commit the crime before it could punish him for planning it. 4 years of evidence, 6 encoded lullabies, a dead man in Tucson, a bottle of digoxin, and 9 forged documents. None of it was sufficient until Grant Mercer walked through my front door and put his hands on my father's files. My mother opened the prepaid phone and sent a single text message. 3 words. I did not see what they were. She closed the phone and returned it to the piano bench. "Patricia," she said, confirming the timeline to Daniel. At 4:27, the progress bar reached 91% on server 1. The house was quiet. I had drawn the curtains in the front parlor. I had placed a teacup on the side table empty. But Grant would not check. I had turned off every light except the small lamp beside the armchair, which cast the room in a dim amber glow that looked like sleep. My mother had gone to her bedroom. She closed the door. From the hallway, there was no sign that anyone in this house was awake or aware or waiting. I returned to the music room. 94%. I turned the screen brightness to its lowest visible setting. The progress bar became a faint blue whisper in the dark. Then I went to the parlor. I sat in the armchair. I closed my eyes. And I waited. The sound of tires on gravel came at 6:43. I did not open my eyes. I kept my breathing slow and even the rhythm of a medicated man in deep sleep. The teacup sat on the table beside me. The lamp painted my face in warm light. I was the picture Grant Mercer expected to find. The car stopped. A door opened and closed. One door. One person. Footsteps. On the gravel path. Measured and unhurried. The footsteps paused at the front porch. I heard the metallic sound of a key sliding into the lock. The deadbolt turned. The door opened. Cool October air entered the house first. Then the footsteps. Grant Mercer stepped into the foyer and stood still for what I counted as 11 seconds. Listening. Assessing. Confirming that the house matched his expectations. Dark. Quiet. Occupied by one sleeping old man and one blind old woman. He moved past the parlor doorway. I felt his presence the way you feel someone watching you. In a dark theater, not through sight but through the displacement of air. The faint compression of floorboards, the almost imperceptible shift in the room's acoustic signature. He paused at the doorway. I knew he was looking at me. I kept my breathing unchanged, slow, steady. The breathing of a man who had drunk his tea and surrendered to it. He moved on. His footsteps went to the staircase. He climbed carefully, avoiding the 3rd and 7th steps, which creaked. He knew the staircase. Vivian had told him which steps to avoid. I heard him reach the 2nd floor landing and pause again. My mother's door was closed. No light beneath it. He continued upward to the 3rd floor. The study door opened. I heard the filing cabinet drawer slide on its metal tracks. A sound I had heard 10,000 times in my life. A sound that meant paperwork and contracts and the ordinary machinery of a man's financial existence. Now it meant theft. In the music room, behind a closed door, the progress bar moved. I could not see it from the parlor, but I could feel it the way my mother felt vibrations through the piano. The way this house transmitted its secrets through wood and bone and silence. Server 1 was completing. 147 megabytes of encrypted truth traveling through copper wire and fiber optic cable to a secure terminal in Charlotte, where Agent Claire Whitmore was waiting. Grant was in the study for 14 minutes. I counted each one. I heard papers shuffle. I heard the filing cabinet open and close 3 times. I heard a zipper, a bag, a briefcase open and close twice. He was collecting, sorting, removing the evidence of my father's intentions and my own legal autonomy, replacing them with the void that Grant and Vivian needed to make their fabricated documents the only record that mattered. At 6:59, his footsteps returned to the staircase. He descended with the same careful avoidance of the creaking steps. He reached the foyer. He paused again at the parlor doorway. I felt his gaze on my face like a cold finger. Then he did something I did not expect. He spoke. "Sleep well, old man," he said. His voice was quiet, almost gentle, carrying the particular cruelty of a man who believes his victim cannot hear him. "This is the last night you spend in this house." He walked to the front door. He opened it. He stepped onto the porch. And then I heard a voice that was not Grant's. Grant Mercer. A woman's voice. Calm. Practiced. Carrying the weight of federal authority. FBI. Do not move. Place the bag on the ground and put your hands where I can see them. I opened my eyes. The front door was still open. October air moved through the foyer, carrying the scent of magnolia leaves and damp gravel. Through the doorway I could see the porch, the first 3 steps, and the gravel path beyond. Grant Mercer stood at the top of the steps with a black leather briefcase in his right hand. His left hand was raised to the level of his shoulder. He had not yet put the briefcase down. Agent Claire Whitmore stood at the bottom of the steps. She was shorter than I expected, 5'4", perhaps 5'5", with dark hair pulled back and a navy windbreaker with 3 yellow letters across the chest that caught the porch light. Behind her, 2 agents flanked the gravel path. One had come from the direction of Mountain View Road, the other from the trailhead. Both carried flashlights that created sharp white corridors in the October darkness. Place the bag on the ground, Whitmore repeated. Her voice carried no urgency. It was the voice of a woman who had waited 4 years for this moment and intended to conduct it precisely. Grant lowered the briefcase to the porch floor. The leather made a soft sound against the painted wood. He placed both hands at shoulder height. He did not speak. I watched his face through the parlor doorway. The angle gave me a partial view, enough to see his profile against the porch light. His jaw was set. His eyes moved between Whitmore and the 2 flanking agents with the rapid calculation of a man assessing exits. There were none. Grant Allen Mercer, Whitmore said. You are under arrest pursuant to federal warrant number WF 210414, issued by the United States District Court for the Western District of North Carolina. You are charged with conspiracy to commit wire fraud, conspiracy to commit insurance fraud, forgery of financial instruments, and criminal trespass. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. She continued through the Miranda advisement. Grant listened without moving. When she finished, one of the flanking agents ascended the porch steps and placed Grant's wrists in handcuffs. The metallic click was small and final, the sound of a mechanism closing that would not open again for a very long time. I stood from the armchair. My legs were unsteady. Not from medication, not from the tea, but from the adrenaline that had been building since 12:17 that afternoon, when my mother pressed the touchpad and started the upload. I walked to the foyer and stood in the open doorway. Grant saw me. His eyes moved from Whitmore to my face. And in that moment, the calculation in his expression collapsed into something else. Recognition. Not of my face, he had seen my face before. Recognition that I was standing in the doorway with clear eyes and a steady posture, and none of the symptoms of a man who had been medicated into incompetence. Recognition that the sleeping old man in the parlor had not been sleeping at all. Henry, he said. Just my name. The way someone says a word they suddenly realize they have been mispronouncing for years. I did not respond. There was nothing to say to a man who had planned my death from a rented office in Charlotte and called it a business strategy. The agent guided Grant down the porch steps and along the gravel path toward the unmarked sedan on Mountain View Road. Grant walked without resistance. His shoes crunched on the gravel in a rhythm that grew fainter with each step until the October darkness absorbed him entirely. Whitmore climbed the porch steps. She was holding a clear evidence bag containing the black briefcase. She looked at me with an expression that was professional, but not unkind. Mr. Calloway, she said. I'm Agent Claire Whitmore. We spoke through your son Daniel. I need to inform you that a second team is currently en route to Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport to detain Vivian Mercer Calloway. She is scheduled on a return flight tomorrow morning, but we have reason to believe she may attempt to leave earlier once Grant fails to make contact. The warrant for her arrest was signed 40 minutes ago. On what charges? Conspiracy to commit murder, administration of a controlled substance without consent, conspiracy to commit insurance fraud, an accessory to the death of Marcus Antonio Vargas in Pima County, Arizona, January 2018. The Pima County District Attorney's Office has filed a separate warrant. She will be held in federal custody pending extradition proceedings. My mother's voice came from behind me. Is the upload complete? I turned. She was standing at the foot of the staircase. She had descended without sound, the way she had moved through this house for 4 years. Invisible, watchful, recording everything. She was not wearing her dark glasses. Her cane was nowhere in sight. She stood with both hands at her sides and looked directly at Agent Whitmore with the full clarity of a woman who could see every detail of the scene before her. Whitmore looked at my mother for a long moment. I saw something shift in the agent's expression, a recognition that went beyond the professional. She was looking at the woman who had built this case from a piano bench, the woman who had encoded intelligence in lullabies and transmitted it through the United States Postal Service, the woman who had been described in every briefing document as CI-7 Confidential Informant Number 7, and who now stood in her own foyer, in a house she had defended for 4 years without ever raising her voice. Mrs. Calloway, Whitmore said. Server 1, confirmed receipt at 6:22 this evening. Server 2 is currently at 41%. Server 3 will begin automatically upon completion of Server 2. Estimated time for full completion? Between 1 and 2 a.m. My mother nodded. She looked at the open front door, at the gravel path where Grant had walked, at the October darkness beyond the magnolia trees. Then she looked at me. Come, she said. We should sit with the piano while we wait. We returned to the music room. The laptop screen glowed faintly. Server 2, 44%. My mother sat on the piano bench. I sat beside her. Whitmore remained in the foyer, speaking into a radio in low measured tones, coordinating the Atlanta team, confirming Grant's transport, securing the evidence chain. My mother opened the fallboard. She placed her fingers on the keys, and for the first time in 4 years, she played not to encode, not to signal, not to transmit intelligence through a network of retired professors and estranged sons and federal agents. She played because the house was quiet and the danger was passing, and her hands remembered what it felt like to make music that meant nothing except itself. She played Chopin, Nocturne in E-flat major, Opus 9, Number 2. The notes filled the room, the way light fills a room when the curtains are drawn open after a long darkness. I listened. The progress bar moved, and somewhere on Interstate 26, a man in handcuffs sat in the back of an unmarked sedan and watched the mountains disappear. The Chopin ended, and my mother did not begin another piece. She rested her hands on the keys without pressing them, 10 fingers hovering above the ivory, in the posture of a woman who had said everything she needed to say through music, and was now content to sit in the silence that followed. The laptop screen showed Server 2 at 53%. The clock on the mantel read 7:21. Agent Whitmore had moved to the front porch, where I could hear the low frequency of her voice through the closed music room door status calls, confirmation codes, the bureaucratic architecture of federal law enforcement operating in real time. Are you hungry? My mother asked. The question was so ordinary, so disconnected from the previous 12 hours, that I almost laughed. I had not eaten since the toast I made at 7 that morning, before Vivian left, before my mother spoke, before everything I believed about my life was dismantled and rebuilt in the space of a single October day. I could eat, I said. There is soup in the refrigerator. I made it Tuesday. Butternut squash. Vivian does not know I cook when she is not watching. We went to the kitchen. My mother heated the soup on the stove, not the microwave. The stove. The way she had always cooked before the blindness. Before Vivian. Before the years of pretending to be less than she was. She moved through the kitchen without hesitation. She opened cabinets by sight. She reached for bowls on the correct shelf. She turned the burner to medium without fumbling for the dial. Every movement was a correction, a reclaiming of capability that had never actually been lost, only hidden. We ate at the kitchen table. The soup was good, warm and slightly sweet, with a thread of ginger that reminded me of meals my mother had made when I was a child. In this same kitchen, at this same table, under the same pendant light that my father had installed in 1968, and that still worked because he had wired it himself, and my father's wiring always worked. When did you start cooking again? I asked. 2020, she said. After my sight returned fully. I would wait until Vivian left the house. She went to the grocery store every Thursday afternoon between 2 and 4, and I would cook. Small things at first. Rice, eggs, then soups, bread, a roast once. I stored the food in containers at the back of the refrigerator, behind the items Vivian purchased. She never looked there. People do not search for what they do not believe exists. We finished the soup in silence. Through the kitchen window, I could see the backyard, the garden my grandmother had planted in 1951. The stone wall that marked the property line, the dark ridge of the Blue Ridge Mountains against a sky that held the last amber trace of a sun that had already set. The stars were appearing. October stars, sharp and cold, indifferent to the human machinery operating beneath them. At 8:45, Whitmore knocked on the music room door. My mother and I had returned to the piano bench. Server 2, 87%. Mr. Calloway. Mrs. Calloway. Whitmore stood in the doorway with a tablet in her hand. I wanted to update you on 2 developments. First, Vivian Calloway was detained at Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport at 7:58 this evening. She had changed her flight to a 9:30 departure to Mexico City. She was carrying a passport under the name Natalie Caruso, her birth name, and approximately $12,000 in cash. She is currently in federal custody at the Atlanta field office. Mexico City. $12,000. A passport in her real name. Vivian had known or suspected that something was wrong. Perhaps Grant was supposed to call her after leaving the house. Perhaps his silence told her everything. Second, Whitmore continued. Dr. Raymond Sutter was contacted by our Charlotte office at 7:15 this evening. He has agreed to cooperate with the investigation in exchange for consideration in sentencing. He has confirmed the following: that he prescribed medications to you without proper examination on 4 occasions between 2019 and 2023, that he conducted the cognitive evaluation at Mission Hospital in December 2021 with the predetermined intention of supporting a guardianship filing, and that he received approximately $95,000 from Grant Mercer over a 4-year period for these services. $95,000. That was the price of my autonomy. Less than the cost of the Steinway in the next room. Dr. Sutter has also confirmed that the digoxin prescription found in your medicine cabinet was written on a pad stolen from his office by Vivian Calloway in August of this year, and that he did not authorize it. He states he was unaware of the digoxin plan. We are evaluating that claim. Whitmore looked at my mother. Something passed between them, not words, but the mutual recognition of 2 women who had operated on opposite sides of the same wall for 4 years and were now standing in the same room for the first time. Mrs. Calloway, Whitmore said, your evidence has been extraordinary. The encoded compositions alone constitute one of the most unusual intelligence channels I have encountered in 18 years of federal service. I want you to know that. My mother nodded once. She did not smile. Praise was not what she had been working for. What time will Server 3 complete? My mother asked. Based on current transfer rates between 1:15 and 1:45 a.m., my mother looked at the clock. 9:02. 4 hours and 13 minutes, at minimum, until the final server confirmed receipt. 4 hours until every document, every recording, every encoded lullaby, and every photograph was beyond the reach of anyone who might want to destroy it. Then we wait, my mother said. Whitmore returned to the porch. My mother and I sat with the piano. The laptop screen glowed. Server 2 reached 91% at 9:18, 95 at 9:31, 98 at 9:44. At 9:52, the screen changed. A single line of text appeared beneath the progress bar. Server 2. Upload complete. Initiating transfer to Server 3. Richmond, VA. A new progress bar appeared. 0%. Estimated time: 3 hours and 26 minutes. My mother placed her hand on the piano lid. Not playing. Resting. The way a person rests their hand on the shoulder of someone who has carried them a great distance. One more, she said. One more, and it is finished. The house settled around us. The old Victorian bones creaked the way they had creaked for 114 years, wood contracting in the cooling night air. Pipes ticking behind plaster walls, the particular groan of a structure that had outlasted the men who built it and would outlast the men who tried to steal it. I listened to the house, and the house listened back, and for the first time in 7 years, I heard it clearly. I must have fallen asleep. Not the chemical sleep of the past 7 years, not the heavy, dreamless descent that Vivian's tea had manufactured every evening, but the natural sleep of a body that had carried too much for too long and simply needed to rest. I fell asleep on the piano bench beside my mother, with my head tilted against the side panel of the Steinway, and the last thing I saw before my eyes closed was the progress bar at 37% and the clock at 11:14. When I opened my eyes, the room had changed. The laptop screen displayed a single line of text in white letters against a dark background. Server 3 Richmond, VA. Upload complete. All transfers confirmed. Encryption verified. Timestamp: Trenta. Set. It was over. I looked at the clock. 1:34 in the morning. My mother was still beside me on the bench. She was awake. I do not believe she had slept at all. Her hands were folded in her lap, and she was looking at the screen with an expression I had never seen on her face, not relief, not triumph, not exhaustion, but something quieter than all of those. The expression of a woman who had finished a composition that took 4 years to write and was now hearing the final note decay into silence. "It is done," she said. 2 words, 4 years of evidence collection. 6 encoded lullabies, 1 stolen digoxin tablet in a plastic bag, 1 set of holographic wills, hidden inside a Steinway Model B, 1 federal investigation coordinated from a piano bench, and the summary was 2 words long. "It is done." Agent Whitmore appeared in the doorway. She had not left. She had been on the porch for the past 7 hours, managing a federal operation from a wicker chair beside a pot of dead geraniums. Her face showed fatigue, but her eyes were alert. "All 3 servers have confirmed," she said. "The evidence package is secure, redundant, and legally preserved. I will be filing the formal case report with the Western District of North Carolina tomorrow morning. Mr. Callaway Henry, you should know that based on the evidence your mother collected, we anticipate the following proceedings." She listed them the way a doctor lists a treatment plan, clearly, without emotion, in the order they would occur. The federal charges against Grant Mercer would proceed to grand jury within 60 days. Vivian Callaway Natalie Caruso would face both federal charges in North Carolina and state charges in Arizona for her role in the death of Marcus Vargas. Dr. Raymond Sutter's cooperation agreement would require full testimony in exchange for a reduced sentence. The 9 documents I had signed while impaired would be challenged through a federal motion to void on grounds of diminished capacity, supported by toxicology evidence and Sutter's own testimony. The $4 million policy through Blue Ridge Meridian would be voided as a product of fraud. The guardianship filing would be dismissed. "And the house?" I asked. "The house, the estate, and all associated assets remain yours. The holographic wills your mother preserved establish an unbroken chain of testamentary intent. No court in this district will challenge them." My mother stood from the piano bench. She crossed the room to the bay window and drew the curtain. Outside, the October night was ending. The first suggestion of dawn showed at the eastern ridgeline, not light yet, but the memory of light. The way the sky above the Blue Ridge turns from black to the deepest possible blue before the sun arrives. The magnolia trees along the gravel path were still silhouettes, but their edges were beginning to separate from the darkness behind them. "Agent Whitmore," my mother said without turning from the window. "Thank you. You may go." Whitmore looked at me. I nodded. She gathered her tablet, her radio, and the evidence bags containing the briefcase and the digoxin sample. She shook my hand. She shook my mother's hand. Then she walked out through the front door and down the porch steps, and I heard her car start on Mountain View Road and pull away into what was left of the night. The house was ours again. My mother returned to the piano. She sat on the bench and opened the fallboard and placed her fingers on the keys. The Steinway was out of tune. It had not been tuned since 1997, since my father hid the wills inside it, since it became not just an instrument but a vault and a weapon and a witness. The notes it produced were imperfect. Some were flat. Some carried a faint buzz where the felt hammers had hardened with age. But my mother played anyway. She did not play Chopin this time. She did not play a lullaby or a cipher or an encoded intelligence report. She played a melody I had not heard in decades, a simple theme in C major that my father used to whistle while he worked in the garden on Saturday mornings. I do not know if my father ever knew it had a name. I do not know if it was a real composition or something he invented while pulling weeds and trimming the boxwood hedge along the stone wall. But my mother knew it. She had heard it for 47 years of marriage, and she played it now on an out-of-tune piano in a house that had nearly been stolen from us, in the first light of a morning that felt like the first morning of a life I had not yet begun to live. I listened. When she finished, I made tea. Not from the canister Vivian had used. From a tin of Earl Grey, the tututi. Tututo, my mother had cooked in secret on Thursday afternoons. I boiled the water. I measured the leaves. I poured 2 cups and brought them to the music room and set one on the piano lid beside my mother. She picked up the cup. She looked at me over the rim. "Is it safe?" she asked. There was a flicker in her eyes, not fear, not suspicion, but the particular dark humor of a woman who had spent 4 years documenting poison in tea and was now being offered a cup by her own son. "I made it myself," I said. "Good." She drank. "That is the first rule of the rest of your life, Henry. Make your own tea." The sun came over the Blue Ridge at 6:47. I know the exact time because I was watching for it the way my father used to watch for it from this same window, in this same room, beside this same piano. The light moved across the garden, across the stone wall, across the magnolia trees, and through the bay window into the music room where my mother and I sat together drinking tea. We had made ourselves in a house that belonged to us, and always had. 3 weeks later, Daniel came home. He drove up from Nashville in a truck he had borrowed from Patricia Novak's son-in-law. He stood in the driveway for a long time before he came inside. When he did, he went straight to the music room and sat on the floor beside the piano and put his head in his hands and did not speak for several minutes. My mother placed her hand on his head the way she had when he was a boy. None of us said anything. The piano said it for us, not through sound, but through presence. Through the fact that it was still here. Still holding what mattered. Still standing in the room where it had stood since 1941. I am writing this from the porch of the same house on Sunset Mountain. It is December now. The magnolias have lost their leaves. The Blue Ridge is white with early snow. My mother plays the piano every morning, real music, for no purpose other than the sound of it. Daniel visits on weekends. Patricia Novak sent a Christmas card with a note that read, "The lullabies were my finest work. Do not tell Vanderbilt. The legal proceedings are underway. I do not know how they will end. I know only that the evidence is secure on 3 federal servers, that the wills are safe inside the piano, and that every morning I make my own tea and carry a cup to my mother and sit beside her while the sun comes over the mountains. Pay attention. Make your own tea. And never stop listening. The piano knows everything.